Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin. Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm your host, Steve Taplin. This is where tech leaders drop the filter and just tell it like it is. I have been a serial entrepreneur with 30 companies under my belt. 20 of those failed, but 10 succeeded. And that roller coaster of a ride is my new book called Fail Hard, Win Big. And it's my story of how I took the power of failing in ventures not to discourage me, but to propel me and to learn from those lessons. And then the power of custom software development and what that does for operations, client experiences, and enterprise value. Today, I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We are a nearshore software development firm. We help scale existing engineering teams. We build MVPs in as little as 7 days. We have a 90-day risk-free trial on our engineers. And today, I am joined by Levi Malott out of Missouri. Levi has been an engineering guy through and through, started programming as a kid, multiple engineering jobs, worked his way up to VP engineering and now CTO. Levi, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Levi, if you would give our listeners a couple-minute overview of the journey of your career.
Sure. Taught myself programming at a young age. I went to an engineering school in Missouri. There, got connected to SpaceX through some mutual friends. Took a pause out of my PhD, went to go do a co-op at SpaceX, realized I was learning way more there and just stayed. So stayed for about three and a half years. And then from there, started doing a startup tour. So joined BetterUp as a data engineer. Then took a chance on an AI climate tech company back in 2020. Joined as one of the first engineers there, became VP of engineering and kind of like ran science product engineering, helped grow that through the Series B. And then now I'm at Weave Bio as the CTO. And what we're doing here is trying to automate a lot of the regulatory filings for drug development companies.
Well, and I want to touch on that more, but question for you, your time at SpaceX, did you run into Musk at all there?
He was around. Yeah. His office was on the first floor there, so you'd see him around quite a bit.
And is he as hardcore as everything says, as far as sleeping on the floor, everybody working 6-7 days a week?
Yep. And it's, companies have a certain way of adopting the behaviors and mindsets of their leaders. So that was a lot of the culture there too, especially when there was like late night missions or something like the Dragon missions to the space station. The docking would happen at 3 a.m. So there would be rooms with cots in them so people could go sleep and then like get back on shift.
Wow. Crazy. All right. So tell us more about your company, Weave Bio.
Yeah, Weave Bio. Company was founded in 2022. The initial idea was to help with sort of drug discovery. You know, at the time, this is when like the ChatGPT just came out. And I think there was a lot of like, emphasis on like, wow, this is a crazy technology. What can we do with it? So the original idea was around drug discovery. There was a lot of companies trying to do that and a lot of research going into it. And the product really wasn't clicking. And through a lot of customer feedback, people kept saying like, hey, you know what's like really, really annoying and painful is submitting all the filings for jurisdiction to get your drugs approved for human trials, the ongoing filings for human trials, and then eventually to market. And so our platform uses LLMs. People upload documents, all their source files, studies being done, and then use that to generate most of the documentation that they need to go file for different milestones along that regulatory journey. So we think of it as like a human augmentation platform. Humans are going to be in the loop, but we're going to help them do their jobs a whole lot better. The existing processes are people emailing stuff, tracking things in spreadsheets, and just a lot of like back and forth. So we're trying to bring that whole process online and then supercharge it with AI.
Fantastic. Now, being a CTO is a tough job, to say the least. You got to lead the engineering teams, and then you have to deal with all the business side that may or may not understand technology, let alone software engineering. So I always like to ask, how did you get the role? How did you get your current role? Because I know, there's a lot of CTOs that are either on the market for a new role so I always like to ask to see kind of what tips we can give others out there.
So I'll start with how I started and then go to my tip, I guess. But so I got this through a friend of friends. We've had an executive recruiter because they were looking for a VP of engineering, and I just happened to know them through mutual connection. And he tipped me off to the role. He knew that I was looking and starting to look for something new. And then through the interview process, I actually dropped out and said, like, hey, you know what? I don't think this is actually going to be a fit, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to make a leap. And then one of the founders kind of kept calling me, and eventually I relented and said, please stop calling me. I'll just join. So I joined in, and then it's been great ever since.
So you use your network, and then you played hard to get.
Exactly.
I love it.
It's like you get the best of both worlds. It's like, yes, I'm looking, but not that seriously. So you have some leverage, when you start talking about compensation and stuff. But no, I really wanted to make sure it was like the right fit, because I was coming off the heels of something where the company just transformed into something like very different than when I initially started. And I obviously had a lot of learnings from building an engineering team from 1 engineer to 50 engineers, and like what that process was like. And then also just like working with founders. So I wanted to take it slow and make sure I was finding the right fit, because the thing I can't stand, this is probably coming from just engineer mindset, is like working on stuff that's wasteful. Like sometimes our whole job is to just like eliminate waste, automate things, fix things, things like that. So, and the biggest source of waste in a startup is working on the wrong thing. And I think, if you're evaluating an early stage company, it's really like, are these the right people to be working with? Is there value alignment? So I think
great points you're bringing up.
Having a good network, especially with recruiters, is very helpful, especially at like a VP C-suite level, and just like understanding like, hey, are there opportunities? Or, hey, if you know of anything that may be a fit to me, just send it my way anyways. And like, who knows what's going on in my life at that point, I may be open to it.
Awesome. Now tell us about some current projects you're working on.
Yeah. So, there's quite a few. I mean, we're a small team, but we keep a lot of stokes in the fire. We keep teams small. In this theme of like regulatory filings for drug companies, there's a couple different dimensions of, I'd say, complexity. One of them is, can you support all of the documents and all of the updates and all of the sort of just like workflow processes that people need to do? So that's kind of like one. And then there's this aspect of geography or jurisdictions that you can actually support. So US versus Canada versus EU, Australia, they all have different rules, regulations. There's just different governments. Yeah. We're trying to get end to end in the US and then expand from there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, talk to us about your software engineering team and the work model and how you like to manage the team.
Yeah, I probably have some countercultural points when it comes to this, from my prior experience building teams from the ground up. I try to stick to the books, so there's like Marty Kagan's Empowered, and kind of this concept of like stable teams oriented around customer experience. And I have found that it was just way too rigid for how quickly you need to move as a small team. Anything that you do, any project you start on, the uncertainty of if it's going to be useful is like pretty high. So you don't have the luxury of like, hey, we're going to build an enterprise team and a mid-market team, or, a seller experience and a buyer experience. Like, who knows if those will even be durable concepts around to kind of like form teams around. So here at Weave, when I came in, we wanted to keep things very flexible. So it's all project-based. It's like, what is the pipeline of projects that we want to bite off? And then how do we staff those up accordingly and don't get too married to like, the people working on a project with you like this exact day, because maybe it's the same group on the next project, but maybe not. So, and how that looks for trying to like hiring and like planning of like headcount is, I like to hire into disciplines. So like front end engineering versus back end versus AI, and find people that are excellent at that one thing, but can do the other ones well enough.
Gotcha.
And still a full stack aspect of it, but you're getting the people who can have the discipline and foresight for like the long-term architectural planning that you need as the company evolves, and hopefully have enough judgment to like not try to do that all in once of like, I'm not going to deliver anything because I want to work on this architecture, but they can sequence it out on those projects of like, hey, 6 months we're going to need to be here, so like let's do this part today on this project. I found that just be difficult if you're hiring people who don't have that sort of like expert level skill in at least one discipline.
So how many engineers are on your team today?
Right now we have 11, I think is the latest tally.
And are you guys in office, remote, hybrid?
All remote right now.
And are you all US based? Do you have people around the world?
US based, because I've seen that go sideways too. A prior role where just too many different geographies, too much time zone, like not overlapping to where it made it difficult to like get pull requests through and review to get feedback addressed. So there was part of it was nice where like someone was always on, but the flip side of it, it's like you miss out on a lot of that collaborative time that's important for kind of like pushing a product or a company forward.
I tell you what, I saw a big change 2016, 2017 timeframe as cloud and mobile technologies progress, that it's pretty darn hard to have an hour or two overlap and pass a project to another team because there's too many variables. And without that constant communication, you can get stuck or go the wrong direction pretty easily.
Yeah, because you need those communications to almost be solid. You need them to be
Yes.
right in contracts because, again, like biggest source of waste is working on the wrong things.
Yes.
The knowledge we have of like, is this the right thing or not is pretty limited. So it's like you need to deliver something, try it out, get feedback, and go from there. Hey, take this ticket and implement it the exact way this ticket says, because that's just not useful. So absolutely, you can't just like have these handoffs in that process. It just will not work.
I'm with you. All right. What's your current or your ideal tech stack and why?
This is probably going to get me like speared at some point, but I've always been a Python fan. I guess I started in C++, but Python has been my go-to just because I feel like it's really fast to do a lot of things. And as much as I like to go into the nitty-gritty details of like memory management and all this stuff and performance, Python is a nice balance to where you can start with a pretty approachable language and then go pretty deep if you need to. You can like turn stuff into C modules and then call them from the libraries. To me, it's always been valuable. And then with the rise of ML and AI, Python became the sort of like industry standard for those things.
Yes.
If you're doing anything related to data science, ML, AI, like you're going to get the best returns by just sticking to that. We go Python, Django, Postgres, Redis, and we keep it like pretty boring. And I think that's also important of like, don't try to get too fancy with like the stuff that just works. Like just use the stuff that works, because you're going to have to bleed a lot of time into how fast the AI side is moving. So it's like, if you use a bleeding edge web framework, you're now going to be dealing with all the stuff that it doesn't support or have, versus Django, where it's batteries included and you can just kind of use it out of the box. And that's like important for us because I think it helps you just like continuously to like move faster. And it's been around so long, like it's a wider developer pool that actually has experience in it. So I think it just compounds if you pick something just simple, battle tested, tried and true, and go from there.
So you've been a senior engineer, vice president of engineering, CTO. You've been at multiple companies. What approach do you like to take if there's a lot of tech debt, and let's just say a lot of wrong choices made? How do you evolve that when you come in?
Oh, that's a good question, because that happened.
It's my job as host to ask good questions.
I know. Well, I think there's probably like the culturally accepted approach of like building credibility and like iterating and evolving stuff and planning a migration, but I think that just hardly ever works. So I think it's difficult because you have to quickly understand what's the business, what are the core problems we're trying to solve, and then like, okay, what is an appropriate architecture to help support solving that class of problem, and to where you're not going to sink a ton of time investing and like maintaining it and like no one can understand it. Like, especially at early stage, so a lot of my experience building companies at this point is like from the very early stage. And that's probably a different lens than like if you're joining a massive organization with 10,000 engineers and like, 30 different like systems that have to be maintained. But I think you have to be unafraid to pull the trigger on like, we're going to stop and we're just going to like simplify everything. So we don't need 20 different microservices. We don't need 20 different repositories and publishing packages. Like just get to a single repository, a single service, go from there. And then from there, you can evolve and add on things. But I think it's very hard to go the other way of like, if you have something complex and then you're just adding more stuff to it, you're just making it more complex. So you have to get to the simplest core you possibly can and then evolve it from there.
Good advice. All right. So Levi, how have you handled when the startup investors, venture capital company board, whatever it is, says, why can't you cut all engineering costs in half. AI is supposed to be able to do that. What's your response?
Yeah, great question. It's like, well, what are the sort of like other parameters that are not included in that calculation? Yes, you can decrease costs, but do you want to increase error rate, increased infrastructure costs, increased like token costs, risk? That's the thing that's like also not baked into that sort of like question of like, okay, what are the risks that are increasing? So, if you work in a domain that's security and data privacy sensitive, if you're working with credit card data, health data, whatever it may be, you know, you have a pretty low risk tolerance and you're going to pay people who can make sure that things are done correctly. Like with LLMs and code gen tools and agents, there's no accountability. You see
Right.
stories of these agents that just went through and like deleted a production database, and that's like, the fault of those engineers that they were like letting this work on a production environment. But the point being is like the checks and balances have to be there, and that's going to come from humans,
Well,
ideally experienced humans.
it is interesting. And I think we can all undisputedly agree that AI can significantly help us in our roles as engineering professionals, help us be more productive, help with things like quick prototyping, testing, documentation, kind of some of the common code. TechCrunch last week posted an article that they had a bunch of the leading engineering AIs take code tests, and the responses were horrible.
Hmm.
They did really, really bad. And it was just kind of interesting. And so, to your point, without that human guided touch and expertise to it, it's a great assist tool, but it's not going to take it all the way there.
Yeah, well, it's the funnier thing too is like you see the big tech companies like Google saying, "Here's how much percentage of our code is written by AI now." And that is like the worst metric to optimize. From my
Yeah.
own experience of using these tools, 50% of the code that they write can be just like whittled down, and typically they're just like way too verbose on like error handling and doing stuff that will quickly get you into trouble once you put that into production. So I think the broader industry doesn't know how to assess like, is this helpful yet outside of like anecdotal usage. And I think
Yep.
people that are actually using the tools, you see like a huge difference in terms of like, what they can do. So, but certainly they are helping people understand code bases much faster, definitely produce prototypes much faster in some sense. Like you can say like, hey, there's like a race condition here, but I have no idea where to even start. And they're pretty good at finding those things out. So there are very like specific use cases where I couldn't go back, to not using them. But trying
Yep.
to measure it as like percentage of code AI generated stuff like that, it's not good.
All right. So let's change gears here. As a tech leader here, more than halfway through 2025, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now?
And this is probably an evergreen question. I think it always comes down to hiring. So I think our hiring processes, or at least like a common wisdom around hiring processes, all needs to be uprooted. Like coding tests live and stuff just like don't make sense anymore. But coming back to the earlier answer of like, AI is replacing, or like, why can't we have AIs replace half the people? You need to find people who have that experience and like can understand like, what is this thing that I'm reviewing? And you need to find people that have the integrity to be honest around like, yes, I'm going to review every single line of that's AI generated and own the outcomes from it. So trying to find those people that marry the experience and the agency, and then are just like cultural fits for you, I think is always the challenge. Are they the right people for this company at the right time? And how are they going to grow? So it's always people, I think. And that's, I think, going to be true even in this kind of like new world.
It's interesting. A few weeks ago, the CIO of University of Texas was a guest, and we got to talking about AI within the computer science, the software engineering degrees, and how companies are trying to push them to teach students how to use AI so they can be more productive. And universities are still trying to get their arms around it. They're not, they just have embedded that's plagiarism, that's cheating. It's, everybody, especially, as we're software industry focused here, if you don't use AI to help you, you're going to be left behind, period.
I think on Simon Willison's blog, he put, saying that AI is going to replace all engineers, that you're going to quit programming because of AI now is like saying that if you were a carpenter, you would quit building because the table saw was invented. It's just another tool that's going to help
It's a
transform.
good analogy. That is definitely a good analogy. All right. So, Levi, as a guy who's gotten some scars and bruises in this space, what's one brutal lesson you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
I think this one is also probably countercultural, but I don't think that you can actually separate people management from technical decision making. So I think it's a mistake to have separate ladders for sort of like technical versus managers. And to some degree, like you do need a pathway for like very senior technical people to like not have manager or not have direct reports, and that's fine. But I think it's the flip side where it's insidious, where you have, people managers, engineering managers, and the expectation is that, they're just there for the people. They're just guiding, career trajectories, stuff like that. Because I think that creates a culture where things get very performative, where it's like all about, okay, what's the next promotion? What's the next milestone in your career and stuff like that. And the business outcomes and objectives become second nature. And, as an engineering manager, like your utility and your effectiveness is going to be dependent on how well you understand the technical systems that your engineers are working with. And if you abdicate all of that knowledge to someone else, you're going to be completely ineffective. You're not going to be able to guide that organization to building a high quality product that people are going to use that creates business value and actually be able to support a business. So I think that engineering managers have to find ways to stay technical. And that doesn't mean be an IC on a project, because that's going to be counterproductive, because like if you're hiring and stuff, like your schedule is going to be slipshod and like you're at the mercy of kind of like everyone else's schedule. But do on-call rotations, do pull requests, do design sessions over the architecture, find ways to continue to have an up-to-date mental model, because at some point...
I think that's great advice. And some of the best CTOs I know are the ones that still get their hands on the keyboard and doing stuff. Now, it might not be for their own company, but nights and weekends, they're testing AI tools. They're building different things just to stay sharp and just to be able to truly mentor their engineering team and managers on current problems, because it's pretty easy to become obsolete very quickly, especially how fast things are moving.
Yeah, so easily. And like people have to stay connected.
Levi, really appreciate you getting uncensored today. Love how you have grown through the ranks as an engineer, an engineering leader, up through CTO. You got the gall for the startup world. I love it. Before we wrap, what advice do you have for other leaders out there who are trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these interesting tech times?
I'd say don't be afraid to find the truth, whether it's your direct reports, whether it's a peer. Always try to find the truth. And, there's a lot of different situations where there's going to be no clear answer. It's lonely at the top. And that's like a saying for a reason, because there are going to be times where, maybe you can ask advice, from trusted mentors or peers or people within your own company, but the decision ultimately may lie with you, and you have to be comfortable with that. And the way to get comfortable with it is not trying to like hide away and like think you can just figure everything out. You have to get out there and talk to people, form an opinion, hear others' feedback, and then move forward with what you think is the right thing to do, and then stand behind it. And know that if you've done your job and your team trusts you, that they may not agree with whatever decision that is, but they're going to trust you. So don't be afraid of, upsetting people. Obviously, don't be mean and things like that, but don't be afraid to speak the truth. Find the truth and then speak it back out.
Great advice, Levi. Thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you like the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. And if you didn't like it, well, kiss my butt. Tell your competitors about it. They could probably use the help. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. Till the next show. Thanks, everybody. All right. That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology,
We deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.